for accelerating low carbon and zero carbon transport, and we've got a great panel to speak today, and we'll have plenty of questions as well, and I'll introduce them as they speak. So we're very glad to be hosting this event, and transport's a really important area for decarbonisation, as we know, and the amount of emissions that transport generates, and how we address that is key. And I think what we've got is a range of different speakers here, and perhaps we tend to focus a bit more on EVs. There's certainly, electric vehicles. There's certainly conversations around that, rail schemes and projects. But actually, it's really important. Lots of people use buses. That is a major form of public transport. How do we green buses? And so we're going to be having a look at that. And also increasing amounts of cycling. We saw lots of the uptake on that during the pandemic, and so we've got some angles on that. Mixed in the modes, the multimodal approaches to that, but also our waterways as well, and how we use those more on and the size of London as well, and the river that runs through it. So we're going to pick up that and pick up other issues as well that people want to do. And I want to thank our partners for the event today, Wrightbus, Brompton Bike Hire, and the Port of London Authority, and you'll be hearing from them. We wouldn't be able to do these events without the support of our partners. Also, we are encouraging people to wear masks in some ways. We've got the door open and things like that. But if you can, that would be great. Other events, people tend to put them on. And there's one more event after this in our programme, and then which has been one of our biggest of any conference really that we've done. And I'd like to say, if you haven't seen a member already, please think of joining. I know a number of people have already joined during this conference, come to some events and thought, let's do that, and it enables us to do more of that work ahead. So we're going to have some opening remarks from people to kick off with, and I'm going to ask Tanya Ferry first. Buta first. Sorry, my own order. Not even reading my own order. So sorry about that. No. So and as I sort of touched on earlier, so Buta Atwood is the CEO of Wrightbus. I'm sure you'll explain a bit more about what you do, but I've been developing the double-decker hydrogen bus, and that is even in operation now, I think, in certain places. So, Buta, over to you, and tell us a bit about this and what you've been, how you see the bus landscape and how you decarbonise it.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Good. Thank you. So, I'm no bus expert because I've only been in the industry for 2 years now, and we took over a failing business 2 years ago. And the reason we took it over is because we were interested in hydrogen, I'll be honest with you. But we quite quickly understood there is a desire for two technologies. One is battery electric and the other one is for hydrogen. And so we made a very clear strategic decision to make both buses available to our customers. So when I talk about hydrogen or when I talk about EV, it's not because I'm trying to sell a certain product. It's just what I've learned in the industry for the last 2 years, and I'm happy to share and also be challenged about it, because I'm still learning. So if I make a mistake, please correct me. So the thing I would say is that short-term battery technology has taken the lead in buses, and the reason is because people are very familiar. We all carry one of these around or something very, very similar, and we know how to charge, we know where the charge is coming from, and therefore batteries have taken the lead with regards to buses. Unfortunately, in China. So I won't mention other manufacturers, I don't think that's fair because they're not on the panel. But they ship in the chassis of the vehicle, that vehicle, all the design and the technical parts of that vehicle is in the chassis. The driveline, the stress engineering, the manufacturing part of that. That comes from China, you body it and you sell it. So all the EV buses that are driving around the UK right now are half from China. Now, that's not a bad thing. But what it does do is tell you where the footprint of that bus is coming from. That design, development, and the technical engineering of that is not done in this country. The shipping of that product comes through, another country, through our ports, and then into our factories, and then converted into a final product. What we do at Wrightbus is design, develop, manufacture, assemble, and sell our products all in the UK. Now, you can already see the footprint of that being very, very small. The second thing we do is we are now, we've got an electric bus and a hydrogen bus. We're developing hydrogen technology, not just in the bus, but also supporting the hydrogen and the production of hydrogen. And that production of hydrogen is through, electrolysis using wind power, and that electrolysis using wind power, delivering it to a bus depot and using it in a bus is what we deem as the greenest method hydrogen using wind power to develop the hydrogen. And some people might say, well, but the electric bus must be greener. Actually, it's not. If you look at the grid itself right now, whether it's 40, 50 or 60% is still coal-fired stations or gas-powered stations. And I was just talking to someone earlier today and said, why do you think the electricity prices are going up? And they go, well, it's because gas prices are going up. And because gas prices are going up, your electricity is going up. So this view that electricity is green, right now it's not. If you live in Norway, their grid is green. So you can plug in there and be very, very, very clear that you are, contributing and participating in a green network. We are probably 5 years away from that in this country, probably maybe a little longer. I don't know the exact dates, but our grid isn't green right now. So it's a good step forward. I'm not from diesel. So what's worse, diesel obviously isn't the mode that we want to go down. Electric is a step forward from that, no problem at all. But where hydrogen is, it can be the greenest. And therefore, as a business, we feel, quite passionate about hydrogen. As I say, we've got both technologies. We sell both technologies and we've got advanced designs in both technologies. But the hydrogen part of our design profile, or portfolio, shall I say, is where we feel the most passionate about, because we genuinely believe that's the greenest way to move away from diesel into green transport. And the final point I want to make is we also believe the cost base of that green transport can reach diesel levels at volume. And that's why we've been asking government to give volume into the market, give us kind of 3,000 buses worth of orders, so we can get the cost base to the level of diesel by going to our suppliers and using that volume to reduce our costs.
Thank you, Peter. That's really helpful. I'm sure we'll come back to this in the questions and around buses. So I'm going to hear from all the industry and different sectors first, and then we're going to come to Kerry and Phil. Tonya Ferry is the head of environment at the Port of London Authority, and has been working there for a number of years and works on the coordination and implementation of all the environmental work and statutory protection on the Tyne River. And I think, as we said, it'd be really helpful to hear around the opportunities for water, but also how we get those emissions down on the water, and particularly around urban ports, and that's relevant for other places too. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you. Can you hear me at the back? My voice doesn't listen to Kerry as well. So that's good. Great, thumbs up, thank you. So I'm going to stick to domestic transport for purposes of this discussion, purely because the international aspect is perhaps beyond beyond our borders, literally. The ports, and in particular inland ports that are adjacent or, like London, run through towns and cities, have a significant role to convey decarbonisation of transport. It is the low carbon route to carry cargo, and we'd be very interested in carrying different cargoes into London to decarbonise other transport modes. But it also facilitates, when we're looking at the large freight, it carries an additional safety consideration on the capital and other urban areas. In London, we have waste carried out of the city into the east, taking over 600 lorries a year off of the road. Now, that's not just the carbon emission of that transport, but it's also the congestion into the roads and those safety concerns of those lorries passing perhaps some sensitive receptors. But as transport decarbonises in the UK, we've already heard how some of the land transport is already making those decisions. Maritime historically has been behind that curve and is racing to keep up. In London, and I'm going to stick to where I know best, in that sense, we've been working on the decarbonisation agenda for the maritime fuels for the last 5 years, and it is a complicated infrastructure, chicken and egg process when we are constrained by the walls around us and what is happening on land. So there's a role to play working with the local boroughs, the cities, and the ports or terminals rather, along the river to provide those fuels, both from land, but also provide the land with fuel, so in both cases. Many ports are actually also very close to the renewable energy that I've been very nicely queued up to talk about. So we can actually utilise that and potentially convey it straight into the centre of those cities and capitals while decarbonising the vessels that carry that fuel itself. So there's a combined effect of those processes. Now, in the future, as we're looking to 2050, obviously ports would be carrying traditionally fossil fuels. We're all trying to work out how our trade will continue. Is that ammonia? Is that hydrogen? Do we import? Do we export? Where do we find the power from? Generally, ports being at the end of the cable line don't necessarily have the automatic ability to plug in their forklift, their cranes, or even provide hydrogen to their hinterlands and their vehicles. So that's something we need to work together on to continue. In the case of London, we're talking about 1 million parcels being needed to be delivered to our doors by various companies that we will be very familiar with, I'm sure, across the boxes that arrive on your doorstep. Those will grow and grow, which will increase the number of different types of small transport vehicles that we require to make those systematic routes. Is it not possible that the vessels carrying passengers perhaps can carry parcels, and then local low carbon or even zero carbon vehicles, or even pedal powered vehicles, can carry those to the shorter distances from those piers and points along the 95 miles in London, potentially improving the emissions of that entire carriage of your parcel. Not necessarily entirely guilt-free, it depends what you've ordered, but effectively making that consequence less and less as we go forward. And again, bringing those products to your business, or to from your business to your consumer, could be using continuing low carbon routes. Ports are working really hard to develop that, and we are really keen to increase our ability to help land transport decarbonise by providing those fuels where it can be carried, like hydrogen, into places in London. However, there are some caveats to that. There are lots of regulations in transport on the road as to how much you can carry and where you can store it. Again, the maritime regulation is slightly behind, so we work really hard with UK government, particularly the Maritime Coast Guard, to develop and understand how we can help in the interim to develop a safe route for these fuels and to decarbonise transport. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Tanya. That's Julian, who's the managing director of Brompton Bike Hire. We had a little chat earlier, which was interesting. I actually noticed these bikes a few months ago, and I thought, oh wow! So it's really good to be able to hear a bit more about them. I'm waiting to sort of try that out myself, and also you seem to do quite a good product placement as well. So, over to you, Julian, and tell us a bit more about the sort of cycling revolution you're looking to do.
Excellent. I'm a bit disappointed that the other transport operators haven't got an example of that.
I'm going down the highway.
It's a bit of a shame, but you know, from cargo ships to Brompton bikes, it's a change in size, I think. So I look after Brompton Bike Hire. Brompton Bike Hire was set up 10 years ago, actually, by our chief exec as a purpose-driven part of the organisation. And we have a very nice, fancy mission statement, which is generally distilled down into 3 words, which is bums on bikes, and it's just to try and be a very affordable way to get people to try cycling. Brompton Bicycles itself has been going for 40 years as of this year. We built 70,000 bikes last year. We're on track to do 100,000 this year. I'm delighted to say all the bikes are built in the UK. They're actually built in West London because we're a bit bonkers. Why would you do it somewhere sensible when you can do it in West London? And I'm very proud to say that we currently employ over 600 people to build those bikes. 80% of the components from the UK, 70% of the bikes are exported. We won't talk about the challenges involved around that. This is not a conversation for today at the moment. But why are we so fascinated in multimodality? Because that really is a hot topic for us. And I think I want to really touch on why cycle sharing and cycle hire is so important. And I think the first one to understand is it acts as a real catalyst for mass transit. This is a way of enabling people to access buses and trains. Quite often people live outside the range and are comfortable walking back from a train station or from a bus. I'm very happy to say that most bus companies now fully got them on board. Thank you very much, bus teams. And we see this in the data. So bike share, like the fantastic PTN scheme in Brighton, or Santander Cycles in London, if that's your flavour, nearly half their rides are combined with other modes of transport. Brompton, somewhat higher, we're at 91% combined with other modes of transport. So it's really kind of stimulating not just cycling, but other modes of mass transit, alternatives to the car. Crucially though, these hire and share schemes work as a gateway into cycling. One of the barriers to people starting cycling is the cost of going and buying a bike. And I call it the gym membership syndrome. If I go and spend 200, 300 pounds on a bike, ride it twice and don't like it, it can be sitting outside my house shaming me every time I walk past it. If you join a share scheme or a hire scheme, you can actually try it yourself. And in this case, you don't have to take my word for it because we've actually got data backed up from Brompton. So around about, in fact it's over now, a third of people join Brompton Bike Hire to try cycling. Simple as that. Not because they like Brompton as a British brand or anything like that. They join it strictly because it's a cheap way for them to try and perform a bike. Crucially, we saw last year, in the last 12 months, 2,000 of our members went on to buy a Brompton bike. Now, that's great for us, but what's really interesting, we know at least the same number again went on to buy not a Brompton bike, another bicycle. So we're really hitting that kind of hot button of getting people into cycling, crucially, then accessing other modes of transport. My third point, and I think this is a fascinating one, it normalises cycling. Okay, if you see someone on a Santander cycle bike, it's unlikely they've got the Strava app running. They're probably going to stop at red lights. It's highly unlikely they're going to be wearing lycra. Goodness for that. So you've got regular people riding regular looking bikes in regular clothes. It normalises, it breaks down that tribalism. It gets rid of that them and us. I mean, nobody talks about busists or tramists, do they? And yet everyone talks about cyclists and drivers. Oh, I have confession, I do both. I'm not a cyclist, I'm a person who uses cycling as a mode of transport. And that's what needs breaking down in people's heads. And that's by providing normal bikes for normal people on normal roads. So what does the future look like in this area? I'll touch it very quickly because I can see the clock in the corner of my eye. The first thing we're seeing is massive sustained growth. So we've got 15 new locations. That's going to take us about 75 locations. We literally opened up in Oban, Elgin and Strathclyde this week. So it's not the London thing at all. We've got one in Carmarthen as well if anyone wants to try that. But crucially, the non-London cityscape. Manchester's going to have a scheme of bike share that's going to rival London in terms of ambition and in terms of scope. I think it's fantastic. Smaller communities have been addressed. We've now got solutions that we can take into places where I was brought up, in the middle of nowhere, where the transport poorer, who don't even have a bus service, unfortunately, because it's not commercially viable. But we can do it at the pub. Bonus, when you get back and you're sweaty, you can have a pint afterwards. And I think finally, the realisation of all of this is it's happening on the ground. In Scotland last week, we launched a multimodal solution that had buses, trains, on-demand transport, Brompton's, of course, that's why I was there, everything all in one hub, and there was a single app that anyone in the UK can download and access all that transport and book all that transport with a single ticket. Multimodality is coming, and if we're going to get the 87% of people who use a privately owned car as their primary mode of transport, we're going to have to work together, not fight over the 13%. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Julian, and actually that point around multimodality and apps to be able to do that, you know, something I wrote about that a few years ago. Now we're seeing this sort of, you know, actually coming to fruition, so that was great. I'm sure we can explore that more as well. I'm going to turn to Kerry McCarthy now. She is one of the Bristol MPs and also leads on green transport for the Labour front bench, and it's going to give Labour's sort of perspective, the national perspective, but also, you know, coming from Bristol, has that experience of the combined authority, the mayor there, and what they're trying to do on transport. Over to you, Kerry.
And all of that in 5 minutes. So it's if I miss things, it's because I've got 5 minutes on because I don't care about those particular aspects of things. But I think it's been really interesting actually this conference, because I've been doing a lot of fringe meetings about in connection with my brief, and I usually when you're one answering the panelists and even the audience. And I think the main thing that comes across is just the sort of sense of urgency in terms of if we're to be serious about transport decarbonisation. The government took an awful lot of time, you know, much longer than it said, to publish the transport decarbonisation plan. But it is a plan, it's not a strategy. There is no, you know, Labour had in its 2019 manifesto that we wanted a ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030. Government was consulting because they preferred 2040, but brought it forward to 2030, which is great, but it almost seems like just announcing that target, that ambition, the government feels that that's it, everyone else can get on with it now, and that is not how you get to it. And I think one of the things that has come across to me, I've just, you know, at luncheons with the Society of Motor Manufacturers, for example, and just talk about everything that's involved in the electric vehicle supply chain. So there's an issue about semiconductors, and that's holding up production of electric vans in Vauxhall, which means that is then, if we can't go with electric vans, all that sort of strategising that we're trying to do in Bristol about making the sort of last mile, the last 5 mile deliveries carbon free. You know, not everything can go on an e-cargo bike, and we're very enthusiastic about e-cargo bikes. You know, and it's that whole issue about producing the vehicles in this country as well. And we're absolutely missing a huge opportunity if we don't have everything right through from lithium mining in Cornwall, which is coming, right through to the final product being produced in this country. But we won't do it unless the government has a serious industrial strategy to underpin that. So, as I said, I think the actual figures, I'm not going to quote them to my head, so I'll probably get them wrong, but actually, although people think about car drivers as primarily people that are commuting or, you know, school run, getting to work, that sort of thing, the majority of people are doing it because of their work. So it might be like van drivers, you know, that are doing deliveries, you know, the HGVs that are taking the notes and so on. So absolutely, it's not just about private car use. It's got, and again, the government has got this real focus on electric vehicles. There's been some funding for charging points, massive gaps in the charging infrastructure, which I've spoken about at the fringe, I won't now. But there's very little in the way of a strategy for decarbonising HGVs and vans. We need to see that. On buses, they promised 4,000 zero carbon buses, and we had a dinner last night with the bus sector talking about this. You know, there's just not a strategy to get us there, and of these 4,000, you know, we haven't seen a single one going into production yet, so we need to push on that. The modal shift, you know, again, you know, active travel, the government announced 2 billion for active travel at the start of the pandemic, and actually announced it in the budget and re-announced it. That has only been very slowly released to local authorities. Far too much of it is through making the bid for certain competitions, so it's very piecemeal funding. I would say, you know, you need to front load that. It's meant to be 2 billion over 5 years. Yeah, let's front load it, get it to councils now so they can embed those, pedestrianisation, the low traffic neighbourhoods, the segregated cycle lanes The whole discussion needs to be had about road space and how it is used, because we've got e-cargo bikes and bike lanes and e-scooters. We've got trials in Bristol and all around the country now. There's a real discussion about, what space is left for the cars, if you ban pavement parking, which is supposed to be coming. It's a long delayed consultation as well. So I'd say in Bristol, I mean, we've gone down the biogas bus route at the moment. And I think, hydrogen is certainly part of the mix. Electric buses for, it depends, the shorter routes, I think, was the conclusion we came to last night. Bus passenger numbers are still down, and there's a debate about the extent to which the government is prepared to subsidise public transport while passenger numbers are still below pre-COVID levels. The final thing I would say, I still feel there's a huge number of things that I haven't covered yet, but Jake's looking at me. But, on the next stage, Labour again managed to get the government to put international shipping and aviation emissions on the agenda for COP. I was a real sceptic when it came to sustainable aviation fuels and the use of electric and hydrogen. I thought it was a way of people not talking about demand for flying. I actually got more confidence now in the technology, but there's a real question about when that is going to come mainstream. And again, there's a lack of a strategy in terms of supporting the people that are trying to get the technological advances that are needed to decarbonise those sectors.
Thanks for that, Kerry. Well, with Phil over the years, and it's really good. He's talked to Zero Events before, and we were just saying he's taken over from Julian Bell, who previously had that role, and now London-wide remit and perspective on things. And I know Hackney's been a sort of fantastic borough for trying to drive forward real active travel. It's not without difficulties. So really great to hear from you and how you see it from the local.
Thanks, Joe. I'm really pleased to be back with Zero here 2 years ago. In a bit. And thank you to all of you. There's lots of Hackney Council colleagues and members of the universities from these debates past. I also just want to add that Councillor Holland is now Julian Bell as chair of Transport.
Oh, sorry.
And she always gets written out, and if it's being filmed, I don't. She's my vice chair. When I'm sat in Transport Environment Committee, I'm working on a cross-party basis with the GLA, government, the LGA, all sorts of bodies in civic society. When I met on Hackney, I'm very proudly a Labour politician. And I think what's been really great about what Zero has done is linking a green environmental sustainability agenda with social justice and the Labour movement. And that's why we're Labour. We believe in social justice, and we are the best in the field when it comes to sustainable and active travel. And I'm one of those rare things, a Labour politician in power, and I'll come back to in my speech what I've been able to achieve since I last sat exactly in this spot 2 years ago. A little bit about Hackney. So Hackney, 70% of households don't own a car. That I know is not replicated in outer London, nor in other parts of the country. We have very high mode share of walking and cycling, and the DfT published their cycling figures, I think last week or the week before, and it showed Hackney again #1 across cycling, around all sorts of cycling, leisure cycling, commuter cycling, 1 day a week, that sort of work. In London, even with, and there's been a lot of debate, I think, across the conference about the divides between the north and the south and cities and rural areas, even with all of London's excellent public transport infrastructure, 70% of private vehicle trips are still being taken. They're not being taken by other modes, but they could be taken. 4.2 million could be taken by cycling, 1.1 million could be walked. That is a shocking statistic in a city with all that transport infrastructure. And I think COVID has sent some people back into the private car, other people are embracing new forms of mode share. And across the country, 60% of journeys are between 1 and 2 miles. Now they can be taken by all the different modes that colleagues have been talking about, and the bus has a pivotal role in London and beyond. If you think about Hackney, Hackney's not got to that mode share overnight, or even just during the COVID leadership that we have shown. People in this room in the 70s, 80s, long before I was born, were campaigning for low traffic neighbourhoods and introducing them. And there's been bold political leadership over the decades to make sure that we are where we are at the moment. We've also never made it a class issue or one part of Hackney. It's very easy when you hear us doing things like closing Church Street in Stoke Newington, so you conjure up a sort of halcyon Hackney resident on their bike in leafy Stoke Newington. But actually it's the estates of Hoxton West, Homerton and Clapton where some of those low traffic neighbourhoods went in, and in Brownswood and Finsbury Park in the 1980s as well. We have done all sorts of filters in our history. Some of the classic kind of 70s, 80s gates. We've used bollards. We're moving to something that's permeable and flexible using AMPR technology. And I think that's absolutely right when you want to bring in blue badge holders, emergency vehicles, council vehicles, and the rest. But even before we were doing all that we were doing more recently, 120 different filters. I'll come back to the manifesto and I'll say about Labour Party keeping its promises. In 2018, we were really ambitious, 30 pledges in a 150 pledge book. So 1 in 5 pledges were around environmental active travel. And that was incredibly important to party members. It's incredibly important to this agenda. And it said very, very clearly, and it's gone into every strategic document since, moving away from private motor vehicles, both in mode share, but also use of road space. And it's absolutely important to get to net zero, that we do this work, but also public health benefits, quality benefits, affordability benefits that we must focus in on. Kerry spoke very powerfully about what we've been announcing at this conference. It's brilliant that we've got that 26 billion announced yesterday for the green economy and becoming the Green Chancellor from Rachel Reeves. You contrast that 28 billion with the government's 27 billion road programme and the only 2 billion for active travel. Other programmes that are supposed to head towards net zero, only 3.8 billion around public sector decarbonisation. The task is about 100 billion on retrofit and decarbonisation. So these funds are completely inadequate. And as Kerry said, you're often competing with other places that want to do this type of investment. We also, and I know that industry people here, and I'll sort of finish here, maybe come out in questions and debate. It's incredibly important that we want British business to succeed in this low carbon economy. And I was on a panel a moment ago with a cabinet member from Coventry. They want that factory, the gigafactory in Coventry, supporting the British motor industry. But every morning pre-pandemic, in the peak of the morning commute, 36 million car seats were empty. We cannot have a situation where we move that commute to EV vehicles and call ourselves sustainable or moving to net zero. It isn't right, it's not right on the school run, it's not right in private business. When I sat here 2 years ago, I said that we were going to make school streets mainstream. I sat here as a borough that had 9, we have 48. I think the last time I met Mary from Living Streets, she said there were more school streets in Hackney and the neighbouring boroughs than almost in the rest of the country combined. We've got to make all of these things local issues, go back into our communities, make a case for active travel and decarbonisation, especially in Coventry. Thank you.
Right, great opening remarks. Really great set of issues been raised. Now we're directly up to the floor and have a load of points. Now, everyone put their hands up so we can just see the span of questions we've got. I'll take them probably in threes and we'll see how many we get. So I'm going to start from the front and then sort of work my way around. And so we'll have these 3 people here. This guy, yes, here.
Thank you. Mike Walter from Transportation Professional magazine. We've got less than 4 weeks to go until Glasgow hosts the COP26 Climate Change Summit. If Labour was in government, what sustainable transport measures would you insist on taking forward?
Okay.
Hi, I'm from Sleaford in Lincolnshire, a low population density area with effectively no public transport, where everybody needs to take a car. Is there any future for public transport in low population density areas?
Claire Neely, Dulwich and West Norden, yes. Councillor Kerr Holland was very definitely key to many things. This is really just a point of information because it's something people always get wrong. It was the speaker there who talked about taking lorries off the road by using boats and therefore reducing congestion. Short answer is if the link on that particular bit of network is already congested, you take a lorry off and another private motor car, single occupancy goes in there. So it's on a wider point, in order to reduce the amount of single occupancy private motor vehicles, you reduce capacity by reallocating space to bus priority, walking and cycling. In order to reduce congestion, you congestion charge. So it isn't a question, it's just something that always annoys me when people don't get it right.
Right, and we might just have one more as well, just to sort of, we'll just have that person there.
Ben Nelms from New Automotive. Giving people in terraces and flats access to charging is key to making the EV transition fair and equitable. I just wondered what the panel thought that local authorities could be doing more, and also what challenges they face in rolling out charging infrastructure, and whether they need any extra powers and support from central government to do that.
Okay, great. So we'll probably start on that question first, and Phil and Kerry, do you want to just pick that up around the charging?
Yeah, I mean, we know that the figures vary, but a significant number of people, particularly in cities, can't charge at home. And one of the things that I've been trying to do, I mean, again, with the government's response to this, they've got the ambition about people replacing personal vehicles with EVs, and I really try to what Philip said, by the way, that we can't see that replicated in the same number of vehicles on the road doing the same amount of mileage on the roads. But we're charging for it. What seems to be happening so far, if you look at there's about 4 different pots of money that have been available to local authorities to put in their public charging infrastructure. A minority of councils have actually received any of that money. I've been trying to get the government to say definitively, how many councils haven't had it, but I managed to do the sums based on, they'll tell me who's got money rather than hasn't got it. But there's clearly a lot that haven't, and it's sometimes a capacity issue in terms of putting together the bids at council level. It might be that the council isn't interested, and I think particularly when you get into less densely populated areas, the market is not going. The market's going to go for the low-hanging fruit. They're going to go for the areas, like the motorways, the main roads, where there's always going to be somebody that wants to charge. They're not going to do it. And if you look, it's not just about where people live; it's where about people travel. I was on a panel yesterday with the chief executive of BTO for Reach, and they have people who use their vans for a living can't necessarily charge at home. They've got to be able to be sure of having a fully charged van when they set off on each of their trips. But they've also probably got to charge on the route because they're going into quite remote rural areas. The government will say that no one's more than 20 miles from a charging point. Well, that's quite a big detour to do, and you get there and it's not working, which is, there's a real reliability issue. So what I'm saying is the government has got to accept that this is a public good to provide charging infrastructure. And I think it was said at the S&T lunch, we need to almost like oversupply, because range anxiety is such a problem for people that they want to know. So like you could say with petrol stations, actually an oversupply. There's more petrol stations than people, but at the moment, they don't get petrol, but putting that to one side, so there just has to be that strategic approach rather than relying on the market to do that. I personally sort of think, and it's the approach we've gone down more in Bristol at the moment, the sort of I can't charge, I've got an EV and I'm in flats. I prefer the sort of rapid charging point that you might use once every 6 weeks, and that keeps you stocked up enough for trips. I prefer that to the pavement things, because there's a lot of issue about use of pavements, but I also just think you'd end up with, the moment you get past 1 or 2 people in the street needing to use that charging point, then you end up with a complete bonfire as to who gets to charge overnight and so on. But without sort of going anymore. There's also an issue about grid connection as well, and grid connection costs in remote areas are a real problem. And again, that's why the market isn't going to step in to do that. And so the market will get you a certain way. You'll see, like, Morrison supermarkets are now putting them in their car parks, and you can post and roll in that lots of places, but there's still going to be huge gaps unless the government sees it.
And Phil, how do you see it from a local authority perspective?
I think I start with everything that Kerry said and echo it. I think London has some advantages. You have TfL, you have the GLA, you have London councils, you have that cross-party, in and out of London collaboration, and there are Conservative boroughs in London that are very proud of being leaders on EV infrastructure. And another one of my vice chairs is in Barnet, and I don't, that they are doing that work. They're as frustrated as anyone. And I think what is our role? Because some people throw around the idea that process can do it all. They cite the fact that councils tend not to run petrol stations and don't run that kind of infrastructure. But if we're going to have social equity and just transition, the planning for where those sites go, where the energy that is generated, is there an opportunity for municipal energy companies? Is there, can you bring an EV charging point to a village and only as a village and then it's a shared resource? There are lots of ways that you can inject labour social justice principles into this industry and that just transition. I think your point, Kerry, I'm really struck when knocking on doors of the states in Hackney, a number of people have taken their vehicles home. Those businesses are going to start to make those choices around EV vehicles, and you see that in delivery, you see that in the AA and British Gas and other things. We can't see those people that are doing jobs that are keeping places like London, Hackney, other places not being able to park near where they live. So we've got to have equity around the EV infrastructure. I think it's a massive role for local authorities, and it's a classic government fudge. Are we just enablers and planners, or are we going to be given the powers, tools, and funding to get really stuck in and then match that ambition with private sector? At a local level. I do think that London Council's using goals, using boards, we've had really good success. 4,000 charging points delivered through London Council's TfL and the government, and I think credibility with the government on delivery. But we're still waiting to see what it really looks like for 2030, and it's quite short-term funding pots. You can't be planning long-term for sort of rolling something out across a whole borough or city like London.
Right, and I think, picking up some of those points, the other questions, and we've covered a little bit about EVs in low dense areas. I mean, Julian and Bootsa, how do we make sure these transport options are available to a wider set of communities, not just in the centre? And Julian, do you want to help?
This is something we're working very hard on at the moment. I'm actually a member of for want of a better word, a collective, because there's no formal partnership. It's called the Urban Mobility Partnership. It's a mixture of different types of transport, from car share to bike hire to buses, you name it, it's in there. And we're really focusing in on what we call a transport port, and that's not necessarily financial, that's access to shared mobility. And when we look at rural areas, this is a big challenge. I mean, for ourselves personally, we've come up with a little mini solution that we're going to be piloting in some rural areas over the next 6 to 9 months. And that's where we'll do a virtual Brompton dock. And before you think we're going to be leaving bikes in the middle of fields in the countryside, which probably wouldn't be very smart, we're actually going to work with local community hubs, and that could be the local pub, that could be, if there's any post offices still left open, the post office, or the community centre, where we'll set up a Brompton dock virtually. People can go in during normal operating hours, pick up a bike, they can and it'll be a Brompton electric, because there's going to be longer range requirements. They can then use that to access the mass transit network, which might be the next town or village over. So they can then get on a nice hydrogen bus with their folded up Brompton, get to where they need to get to, cycle around there, and reverse the journey. The point behind it is to use the low capital cost micro mobility to enable the mass transit. And let's be clear, the bus is the best shared transport out there. You get loads of people on it, and it doesn't take up space relative to the number of people.
No, and it's a similar answer. The thing I'd like to say is, if we carry on doing the same, we'll get the same problems. So we're talking about, how do we charge my car outside my house? The answer is, we're going to have to significantly change how we do transport. The person there has talked about looking at bus priorities, etc. If we look at how we connect different parts of transport and make that transport easier to travel in and out of city centres, places of work, then that connectivity makes it easier from wherever you travel. And whether that's a bike to a bus station, or a car into a park and ride where you can charge and then take the bus into the city centre. These systems need to be thought about, planned, and using government support to organise, plan, fund that allows transport to move and that allows business to work. And I think that's where the lack of thought is. As a bus manufacturer, and we've gone from nothing to quite significant increased jobs, you'll hit a barrier soon enough because there isn't the foresight to connect different modes of transport. And the problems are easily solved. It just requires some thinking and connectivity. And buses travel better when there's a priority. Someone gave me a fact yesterday. Every 5 minutes you can speed up a bus, it has a significant impact on ridership. So those types of things and that type of connectivity, and working with innovative businesses over there, with Brompton, looking at how we move our parcels, our goods around, and looking at how we speed up, our journeys as a whole, will we solve the problem? If we do it in isolation, we just create other problems.
That's right. And then, that's great. I'm just going to open up and say, just a final point, I guess, I'm going to ask all the panel, if you can do very briefly, what's the thing that you would like to see most through the COP, from a probably UK perspective, or what is there anything through the COP process that you would like to see in relation to your respective areas? So I'll start with Tanya on that.
So I think for us, it's that links up infrastructure. So making sure that it links up so the technology that's used in the bus can actually be applied to a train and therefore to a vessel, and actually that we are not regulating and learning in silos, so that the UK government is lining all of those up together so that the cross funding, cross pollination, across that multimodal piece makes a lot of this more possible, tangible, and quicker.
Okay, Lisa.
If I could just tell a little bit of history of Wrightbus. Wrightbus was in administration only 2 years ago, literally 2 years ago. In that 2 years, we've designed, developed new products all around zero emissions, and now we're heading to around 1,000 people. That technology change and investment in design and development, it needs supporting by, the COP process, because businesses like ours will generate more jobs, generate more solutions, more exports, and prosperity in the country. And it's that understanding that the environment is a driver of the economy in the positive direction it should be the focus.
Julian.
I think what I'd like to see is two strands more clearly emphasised and joined up, and the one is funding. You can't get away from the F word. It's going to need subsidy, and it's a dirty word, but it's the reality. This is not going to work. If you look at the amount of money per head spent in a country like the Netherlands compared to the UK, it's ludicrous. And there's 28 billion, what a joke, never mind the 2 billion. £2 billion on active travel. What on earth is that going to achieve? More, the second strand is this short-termism. Let's do a 6-month project. Let's do a 12-month project. What happens at the end of it? It stops. That money, you might as well just spend it on beer. It's achieved nothing. At least with a beer, you have a decent hangover. Sustained funding over a long period of time, linked to a per capita basis.
Kerry.
I would just say very quickly that I agree with what everyone has said, but it's got to be front loaded as well, because you shouldn't be, the change has got to happen in this next decade now. We don't see those opportunities. There's only a 50-50 chance that we're going to get to net zero we're going to keep to 1.5 degrees by 2050 on the basis of what's being discussed now. Your chances of getting there will be much improved if this is the decade in which things happen.
And Phil?
You'd expect to say put local government front and centre, and I say that because I'm from local government, I represent local government in multiple hats, but it is funding combined with local government And some of you may well be frustrated with your councils, and we may get things wrong, and we may feel as aloof as central government, but ultimately, we are in the communities in which we live. We can make and build relationships with business, with skills, with local communities, do that planning and enabling. You're not going to get to net zero in a way that takes this country with us if you don't have the granularity of the country. And that means empowering rural areas, as Claude was saying, it means going with the grain in London, it means empowering metro mayors to make those procurement decisions around transitioning bus fleets that they're now able to properly regulate and shape. At the moment, I have no sense that any government department really wants to come out of empowering and funding local government to do it. And the Treasury scepticism and the inability of people like DFT and Bayes and others to work with local government, I think, is at the heart of this problem. And I think as a Labour Party, we've got to unpick that with whatever their announcements, because it's just not good enough and it's not going to work. My last thing is the Department of the Transport for London, pitch for London. We need stable funding here. If you've been tracking what's happening in London, because of the global pandemic, all of London's transport infrastructure relies on tube fares. It's ridiculous. Everything we do is predicated on tube fares because Boris Johnson gave up vehicle like excise duty and government investment in TfL. So you can't maintain an 8 million citizen city just on tube fares. We need a sustainable funding bill that doesn't expire on a day in December, a month after time. And I know we need investment in northern and rural transport. That is no way to run a global capital city.
And I think we're one of the only cities without an operating subsidy for the transport network, which is not good. So what we're going to do is I'll try and take a large amount of as many points as I can, and then we'll talk so we can get them across, and then I'll try and divvy them up a bit. We'll see where we get. So I'll start with that.
We've spent a lot of time in this country looking at EV as the solution for cars. Even the best EV cars have limited ranges. And yet we're not taking the right moves or the moves towards the longer range vehicles, which are predominated on hydrogen cell technology. And I know that the number of filling points for hydrogen in this country is drastically under the numbers that we're seeing in other countries. I think Germany's currently taking the lead on that particular technology. And what are we going to do to actually catch up, to actually make it so as our heavy goods vehicles, larger vans, long distance car journeys can actually take place? Because as we stand at the moment, we have no technology in place and no solution for any of that.
Okay, thanks for that. We'll come back to the back.
Thanks. From long distance to short distance, and I haven't really been much touched on walking. One of the issues about EVs is that we've seen EV charge points proliferate on pavements and obstructing wheelchair users, people with pushchairs. And it's also a gender issue because most of the short movement journeys are taken by carers who are predominantly women, and making walking better predominantly affects women's journeys. Longer distance commuting journeys tend to be men. So there is really a question of equity. And I know Philip's done lots of work on this, but I'd like to see Labour move away from the issue that a long time ago, this is a long memory thing, when John Prescott didn't want to have a walking strategy because he didn't want to be known as the Ministry for Silly Walks. That's apparently a true story. And I'm sure Kerry will say you've moved away from that, but it'd be really good to hear some better commitments and strong commitments to walking, which is the lowest carbon form of transport of all.
All the initiatives and achievements you're talking about are very laudable, but it seems like for trains, buses and cycling, all these things are trying to be achieved without any maps. You used to have on bus stops, you'd have a map, a geographical map of where you could go. Now you only have diagrammatic, and you've got, of course, like fantastic apps like City Mapper, but people still need to get a sense of where they are when they're in Hackney, how they can get to Bethnal Green or how they can get across to Highbury geographically, rather than just kind of blindly following what the app says. I don't know why, or whether you're having conversations about this, but it seems odd that it's the same with cycle maps. TfL used to do these brilliant cycle maps. So if you're a regular cyclist, you can actually start to like plan different routes that might be like lower traffic. They're all gone. Why?
Neil Shearer from Cambridgeshire County Councillor. We're in the joint administration. We just kicked the Tories out, and we're trying to do all of what you're talking about. Hackney, we love you. And what I want to ask about is we have East-West Rail coming across. It's specified by the government as diesel. What is the chance of getting hydrogen on these trains? And we love the idea of extending the ends and every other part of public transport. It's fantastic.
How do we ensure that the needs of severely disabled people who might rely on personal cars or private cars hires are not overlooked with the expansion of low traffic zones and cycle hire schemes and cycle lane schemes?
Okay, and I'm going to take one more. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to take the person here. Is Kerry's also got to dash, and so we get the answers.
Thank you. So one thing that was really noticeable during the pandemic was that our skies were also emptier and the sound was so much better for everyone. And I just wanted to highlight again that it is significantly cheaper to cross the UK by aeroplane than it is on the train. And what can we do about that aspect of carbon transport that we haven't really touched on so far today?
So great. We've got more on EVs. We did cover quite a lot at the beginning, but some had a bit with walking, wayfaring and maps and how we get about East-West Rail. A question that I missed myself because I'm speaking to Kerry, sorry about that, about the timings. Hopefully someone put a note of that. And then about trains and prices vis-a-vis airfares. Just on East-West Rail, and I'm the chip in, and I'll share that there is a possibility to do that as hydrogen. And one of the it's silly to go for the diesel approach now when you've got technology there that's ready to go. And a part of the report that I wrote last year for a large train manufacturer was exactly making that point. So I think that's what we should press for. It seems daft to do that interim solution, which isn't even a solution now. Anyway, Kerry, do you want to? I'll start with you to know you've got a run.
I've got sort of back-to-back meetings, and they don't really factor in the fact that it's a 10-minute sprint on the seafront in between, so I'm constantly apologising for arriving late or leaving early. But just to pick up a couple of points, on the walking side of things, that is very much part of the strategy. I suppose the difficult thing is it's not necessarily as easy to think of the ways in which you promote walking. Sometimes it is about removing obstacles. I don't entirely get what you're saying, so I've sort of met with people like Guide Dogs, obviously, who've got a big campaign running at a conference this week about e-scooters and concerns about them being on the pavement. And absolutely, in terms of the whole, when you talk about segregated cycle lanes and low traffic neighbourhoods, so that is partly about freeing up the pavements so that people can walk. The government's pavement parking consultation closed last October, and I think they haven't published a response to it yet. And so that's something that we're sort of constantly pressing on. I think things just like signage and so, if you arrive, like say in Bristol, Templemeads, and if there's a sign saying you get to the shops in half a mile down that way, I think that sort of thing really encourages people to walk as well. And one of the things that has come out of the pandemic in terms of discussions is this whole, in Paris they talk about the 20-minute city or the 15-minute city, and I think we're moving towards this combination of the delivery culture and people not going out to shops, but also that idea that more people will be working from home and therefore more people in their local neighbourhoods within walking distance. Again, it's what can we do in terms of regenerating our high streets, so they are sort of places where you can shop locally and not about betting shops and cash shops and so on. So in terms of the domestic flights, I mean, it's a perennial thing, isn't it, in terms of flying being so much cheaper. It would, if I knew whether I was going to go far and I booked like in January, I probably could have flown there and back on EasyJet for £50. God knows what the train fare is going to be. £220. Is it? EasyJet, yeah. But France has actually introduced something where they, if a journey can be done 2.5, I think they're taxi flights, if that journey can be done in 2.5 hours by train, you've obviously got to have the decent trains in place to be able to do that. But what the government is doing now is removing APD on domestic flights, which seems totally out of sync with the whole rhetoric about they are the very flights that we ought to be discouraging people from taking. It also applies to owners of private jets. So you're getting a tax relief on private or tax cut on private jets at a time when we're meant to be tackling aviation emissions. And I think there does need to be a discussion as we go forward about whether perhaps you can replace APD with frequent flyer levy. That's not my call, but that would be something where people who the proportion that goes again I don't remember anyone else, but it seems like I think 15% of people take 70% or 75% of flights or something like that, business travel and so on. And we need to look at how we reflect that in our policy on it. I think the other question, other people who have probably answer.
Right, yeah.
Okay?
Well, thanks, Kerry. That's excellent. And also, I'll say in some of these questions, if you want to just give a sort of final thoughts and remarks as we sort of bring things to a close. I'll end on Phil to round it off. But if there's, I'll work this way from Tanya. Is there any of those questions there that I'm looking around and seeing how they apply? I don't know whether the maps or anything like that, but is there any sort of final remarks that you want to sort of?
Yes, the wayfaring is one of the quite interesting point in terms of how we actually connect the motorway transport with different land and make it possible to know you can actively access, and actually that's something that in inland waterways we now have to plan for the impact of climate change. Of those things will still be accessible despite the water going up on the inside of the floodable plain. Actually, there's some further thoughts about how that will further impact the ability for people to access it. So there's a sort of combined approach to make it practical, but in terms of some of the challenges you might face, particularly where it might flood severe, obviously, being able to actually do so is something we're actively doing to land-based teams for.
Excellent.
So there's a couple of things I will pick up on. One is the kind of infrastructure changes. This gentleman here was talking about hydrogen. I mean, that's an area you think government would look at and take in the priority on, because changing method of a number of areas where either hydrogen filling stations or electrical charging points, depending on your preference. It needs a plan, it needs a location that says, I don't know, every 50 miles you can do either one or the other. The other thing, actually, I want to combine two things. One is about the maps and the other one is about the total cost. Something I've heard the Metro Mayors talk more and more about is, a total cost of a journey. So if you start in, actually I heard that Andy Burnham a couple of months ago in another venue talk about people in the poorest parts of Manchester almost are socially excluded because they can't travel to, another part of Manchester where all the jobs are. And so, similar to TfL, they want a maximum charge. So in a day, it's only going to cost them £10 or £12 a day to travel in and out of Manchester, and they know it's value for them to do a job. If you look at then the total, that in the whole country, if you start in your day and you catch your bus, you catch a train, and then you return. If you know that maximum journey is going to be cheaper than a flight, then you might actually do it, and you might plan a route around it. But what happens is the flights are a lot cheaper, and the other journeys are a lot more inconvenient. And so unless we connect these things together and make it simpler for people to do, we're not going to do it. Let's be honest. I wanted to ask this question right at the start, but how many people daily travel on a bus? But that's probably the most, kind of density of travel that you can actually have. But none of us do it. And we don't do it because we find it inconvenient. It's what we have to do is have connectivity to make it convenient, to make it socially more attractive, that our children think it's cool to go on a bus rather than walk, rather than to cycle, rather than buy these damn scooters that could undercut you on the pavement. it's those things we need to concentrate on rather than, and making sure there's a coordinated transport.
Right, and I think also the point there is, transport authorities are looking for funding to join up with those smart ticketing options, but that isn't forthcoming, it's been so delayed, and really, the question is, well, why isn't that being supported and funded right across the country to get those connected journeys, and not just a few pilots as well, which is delayed. So, Julian, over to you.
Well, I'd like to start by saying my boy thinks buses are super cool. But he was born in the Netherlands when I was living over there, so everyone cycled. So that was everyone does it. Whereas when you came to London and saw buses, they were wow. So don't keep down on your buses. So I want to pick up actually on the walking equity and also disability access to various schemes. I mean, first thing to say is my brother-in-law is severely handicapped, and so every time I see anything obstructing the pavement, I get absolutely bonkers. I've been so tempted to get stickers to put on cars that park on pavements. Pointing out their errors and their ways. I think this has to be addressed, and it's about kind of education. I think Mark would agree. It's about educating people where they can get to on foot. And it's about making it a lot easier, a lot more comfortable, better lit streets, better pavement, cars not on pavement, scooters not on pavement, bicycles not on pavement. Don't ride a bicycle on a pavement, people. You're not doing us any favours. Thank you. And we need, a lot of people talk about shared space. Shared space means being unselfish. It means allowing for other people. And I know it's very easy to say and very hard to do, but actually this is local authority area now. It's to make those shared spaces genuinely shared and genuinely equitable. Remove the tribalism out of transport, whether it's walking or cycling. And in terms of disabled access to bikes, I'm very proud to say I've worked with a number of schemes where they provide many different bikes. One of the things we're looking at Brompton is actually using our virtual solution so that people can start to hire accessible bicycles as well. So watch this space, and I think Hadley are in here, and they're going to help me out with it as well, I know. Yes? Just quite check now. Okay. And I think just my roundup point, public-private partnerships got such a dirty reputation, and we all know why. But I've got to tell you, there are businesses out there like Brompton that really want to work with the public sector and really want to make a difference. So let's try and make it a good, positive thing moving forward, and not just money for the boys club.
That's right. And then just before that, I was going to say, just a welcome plug, I guess. I did the Capital Ring Walk this year, which is TfL maps of walking around London. It's a great thing, like 6 mile walks, all these different points. I'd really recommend it. And those sort of things, we should have much more when we get to really know your city very well. And just a point as well on Sarah's supporting on that local powers and budget for authorities to do this and take forward the climate action needed. It's something we very much put centre stage and have done so. But Phil, your final thoughts?
I think we will need at some point in the next 2 to 3 years kind of capture transport bill that captures some of these issues, because there's regulatory issues with scooters. There's a long-held wish, certainly from local councils, to decriminalisation of speeding and greater local enforcement on that. Play streets have no legal status. Signage hasn't caught up with any of the things that we're doing. And some of the design standards that could be embodied in a bill like that, I think could help navigate some of the challenges around inclusive cycling. There's the question of cargo bikes, there's trikes, there's a whole set of cycling infrastructure out there that actually embeds inequality in the way that it's been designed. Never mind whether you get to the end of your journey and find any cycling infrastructure at all. And the same with sort of walking, I think it's really important. We've done a lot of work with in Hackney, coming back sort of closer to home, with older people to say groups about what they expect in terms of street furniture. And it's very clear they do not want parking on pavements, and we've done a lot to remove it. They want to drop curbs. Councillor Stopps has led this for nearly all the time he's been a councillor, on A-boards, on good quality lighting, and reducing street clutter. And EV infrastructure on pavements? No, on the street. And I think there's some terrible images of local council leaders installing EV infrastructure in narrow terraces in a northern city, where you could not walk by it. And that is not an improvement. And that will fuel the tribalism, because it's something, a vehicle I can't buy on a street that I used to go to walk down, it has real impact. And then I think on wayfinding, I think all of the modes we're talking about, there's huge technological improvements, but that doesn't replace good signage on a bus shelter and some of those expectations when you arrive in a place to be able to find it easy to navigate, and there should be a water fountain, there should be a place to sit down, catch your boat, and all of these things that make cities livable. There should be a tree that provides you with shade, given what we're going to face in terms of climate change. So I think it's not, we need to reduce tribalism, we need to stop modes competing against each other. But the government encourages that in the way that these funding pots work, to sort of finish on. Fast tracking cycle schemes that then don't deliver the other types of infrastructure that people are talking about for other modes. It's perverse, it's disincentives, and we can all do better than that. I think would be where I would finish.
Well, thank you so much for that, Phil, and real talk.
Potholes.
Oh,
potholes. There's £1 billion worth of infrastructure, there's £1 billion worth of backlog just in London alone. Potholes, pavements, it's causing flooding, it's causing trip hazard. If you're a novice cyclist, you're in a bus lane and you hit a pothole and you have a swerve, you're not going to go back out on that bike again. It's an equalities issue for everyone, whether they're walking, cycling, taking a bus, taking a trike, using a mobility scooter. And in that 27 billion, we want the 2 billion for active travel. We also got to maintain infrastructure we've got already, otherwise it's the norm.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for, I think, a real sort of tour de force on all those issues, and just showing when we have excellent local government leaders like yourself, what can be done, and real food for thought ahead. Now, I'd like to, we've now concluded this session. I'd like to thank all our speakers again, thank our sponsors. And then we have one final event later on if you want to join us on how we fund all this stuff, all this green infrastructure that we need. What's that?
Roads pricing.
So, Vincent, I'm sure your question will be able to be asked then. So sorry I didn't thank you. And please join us here if you don't already. And thank you for coming to this.
And if you want to join Labour Cycle's bike ride around Brighton, it's 5 o'clock on the conference centre.
Brilliant.